Bum, 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 bum.
You're listening to Tove, a podcast about the good place and Jewish ideas. Hi, I'm John Spira-Savett, and with me is Dan Ross, and the two of us are rabbis. I work at Temple Beth Abraham in Nashua, New Hampshire. Dan, where are you?
I work a little bit south of you. I'm a rabbi at Central Synagogue in New York.
And we know each other how?
Oh, well, we have been learning together. We've been Chavruta, study partners, for I think over 2 years at this point. We were connected through the Wexner Fellowship, and we're both very grateful to Wexner for giving us the chance to go to rabbinical school and for introducing us to each other. And it's been such a pleasure to learn with you, John, over these past couple of years.
Well, I'm glad to have you here on this inaugural episode of this podcast. Since this is a podcast about a television show and Judaism, and it's a TV show which blends ethical philosophy with humor and irreverence, I think we should say up front that this podcast is motivated in part by a kind of jealousy. So, Dan, what would happen if someone came into your office and said, Rabbi, I have this idea for a year, instead of coming to the synagogue, what I think I'm going to do is every week listen to an episode of The Good Place and then talk about that with someone and what it means to lead a good life, and do that instead of, engaging in the synagogue. What would your reaction to that?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's so funny because I believe that there are exactly 51, 52 episodes of The Good Place. So it really does function in its own way, like a Torah of sorts, right? You've got the cycle. I would say that there's a lot of rich theology to be mined from The Good Place's sacred literature. And what I would say is why don't you come and talk to me about it? Because we're doing right now, I'm happy to talk to you about it as though we're, going from Bereshit to V'zot HaBracha in this context. I think I'd love to kind of do what we're doing, which is talk about not just the show as a sacred literature in of itself, but bringing into conversation with the Jewish tradition as well. So but I totally agree with you on the jealousy point. It's so clever. I wish I had come up with all the jokes and ideas and stuff like that. What would you say?
Well, this would be very hard to answer to. I was thinking about all the people I may have taught over the course of my career, even going back to when I was in high school as a bar mitzvah tutor. And maybe, people who've learned any moral philosophy or ethics through me, maybe it's a couple thousand, I don't know, at the most, compared to just how many people have watched The Good Place. And so I should say that this is, in a way, a chance, in a whimsical way, purely to kind of jump on a bandwagon and speak to people. It's amazing to me that a television creator has gotten people so interested and excited in studying moral philosophy and think it has something to do with their lives. So That's pretty much what we're doing. I can't believe that someone hasn't figured out a way to open a Hebrew school that's based on just discussions about the good place.
I always think, John, about 2,000 years from now, what are the religions going to be? I think about this a lot with Harry Potter, for example. Is there going to be Potterism 2,000 years from now? Are they, is that going to have become its own kind of Bible, or or The Good Place, or anything what? It's interesting to meditate for a little bit on not, and with a great deal of humility, on what the sacred literature of our time is going to mean or not mean way off in the future, if climate change doesn't get us first.
So I think as a way of introducing ourselves a little bit more, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask if there is one of the main characters in The Good Place who you think you are the most like.
Oh gosh. Definitely Chidi. It would have to be Chidi, because I am so cosmically indecisive. When Michael was presented, this is spoiler alert, sorry, but presented that as his sin, and the reason he ended up in okay, whatever. I'm sorry. Like we're already getting to the back of the show. I was like, yep, that's me. That's 100% me. So what about you, John? Who are you? Who do you
Well,
identify with?
I was going to say probably that, both because of my, earnest desire to teach about those things, and yes, some of those qualities as well. And I was thinking about, though, also who I wish I could be more like. And for me, it's definitely Janet. I think this idea of kind of a very
Mm-hmm.
knowledgeable and helpful, person who's light and also like programmed to be incredibly confident. I would love to be just as perfect in those ways as Janet. How about you? Who would you be more of?
Oh my goodness. I really admire Eleanor's, commitment and leadership, right? Like I mean, obviously she has her flaws as a human being, but I just think that she's just such a incredible character for the way that she, collects a group of people and makes them and strives to make them better. I think that that's, as a rabbi, I found that to be incredibly humbling. Her ability to gather people and take them on a journey with her, which I think is in many ways what we do, what our role is, and so yeah.
So there are a couple big ideas I would say that I hope will animate this podcast as we go through episode by episode. One is just to use the show, its humor to explore some core Jewish ideas and texts, and hopefully get you, the listener, to be a bit more interested in them. Just as I say, to jump on that bandwagon. And we're not going to do this to say that the show is Jewish. Or to tell you which idea we think that you should have or agree with. Maybe there's an idea that's Jewish and an idea that's expressed in the show that are different. We're not here to argue for the Jewish one. Maybe when we're teaching classes as rabbis and other things, we might do that. But here, I think the philosophy is more like the old Reese's peanut butter cups commercials, which is two great tastes that taste better together, but also or not. You might find that there's something in the good place you just like a whole lot better than whatever thing we're going to give you from a Jewish text. But if you do like some idea or intrigued by some idea from Torah or Jewish tradition, we will hope that we will have gotten you a little interested and you'll explore it further with some incredible teacher you have available or a resource you can find or that we'll link in the notes to this show. And I might also mention that we are launching this just before the Jewish month of Elul, which is the period of time that leads to Rosh Hashanah, because certainly one of the big themes of the good place is what in Judaism we call teshuvah, the possibility of changing ourselves and making ourselves better and actually changing our destiny. And I should say, if you are listening, that we may well have and probably will have spoilers. Partly, we may not be just smart or organized enough to avoid doing that and talking about things that come up in episodes in the future. So I have sort of a good place origin story of my own, and I hope as I tell mine, maybe you'll think about yours, which is that when the Good Place first came on, I started to watch it and I loved it. There's a kind of humor which I have to say I love. It's been described on another podcast. There's an official Good Place podcast that NBC puts out, hosted by Mark Evan Jackson. I encourage you to listen to it. He plays the demon character of Sean, which we'll learn about later on, and he describes the show as something like deep moral philosophy and fart jokes, and that totally works for me. And so I loved it. And then what happened was I found I was thinking about it as so brilliant that it began to feel like my work. Like I would have to watch it and think about it and relate it, like as we might be doing now, and that I wouldn't be able to enjoy it because it would just turn into sermons or things I would have to teach. And so I actually was scared to watch it and avoided it for several years until my daughter started to watch it, and she was enjoying it so much. And I thought, how is it possible? I love humor. I love these ideas. And so I launched myself back into it, and it turns out I loved it so much, and it was great to be able to talk to my daughter and my wife, who were both watching it and were way ahead of me. Do you remember how you first got into the show?
I remember I got it on a tip from my friend, Rabbi Sarah Paris, who said you should start watching this show on called The Good Place. It's on Netflix, and I said, "Well, what's it about?" She said, "It's a show about the afterlife." I know it sounds weird, but go with it. Just trust me. And then my wife, also a rabbi, her name is Jade, and I started watching it together. And it just became like, we binged through the first season, and then, when it came back on, it became one of those shows that was appointment television for us that we looked forward to. Like, it's like like in the Game of Thrones categories, like unfolding at about the same time, on the same time frame. And um I remember too, John, per your story of thinking about like, oh my God, how many sermons are in each of these episodes, right? It's like, it's gold to mine from. So,
Okay,
is
so
there
we're going to launch into a conversation about chapter one, Everything is Fine. And I want to read you the summary of this, which is based on Wikipedia's version, which I edited slightly. Eleanor Shellstrop opens her eyes and finds herself in a room with the words "Welcome, everything is fine" on the wall. She is greeted by Michael, who informs her she has died after being run over in a supermarket parking lot by a truck advertising an erectile dysfunction remedy. Congratulating her, Michael tells Eleanor she was one of the best people on earth, and therefore she has entered the good place, a heaven-like afterlife. Michael gives Eleanor a tour of the Good Place neighborhood, which is full of frozen yogurt shops and pastel colors, before screening an informational video for her and the other new arrivals. In the video, Michael explains that their actions on Earth gave them positive or negative points, which were tallied up after they died. The people with the highest scores entered the good place. Michael also explains that every person has a soulmate, before telling Eleanor she earned her spot in the good place as a lawyer defending people on death row. After presenting Eleanor with a house designed specifically for her own likes, Michael introduces her to her soulmate, Chidi Anagonye, a Senegalese professor of moral philosophy. When Michael leaves, Eleanor asks Chidi if he will promise always to stand by her, and then reveals that everything Michael said about her life is wrong. She explains how she made a living by knowingly and with gusto selling a worthless dietary supplement to the sick and elderly, and can't recall any good action she has ever done. In town, Chidi introduces Eleanor to Janet, an always at the ready fount of information about absolutely everything. Eleanor and Chidi meet their neighbors, Tahani, a wealthy philanthropist and socialite, and her soulmate, Jian Yu, a Buddhist monk keeping a vow of silence. They are holding a party that evening at their mansion. At the party, Chidi is thinking about whether or not to help Eleanor after she becomes drunk and insults Tahani. The next morning, Eleanor wakes up to see chaos in the neighborhood. Enormous beetles, flying shrimp, roving giraffes, everything corresponding to her insults about Tahani and the bad things she did in life. Chidi tells her she is the cause. Eleanor then asks Chidi to help her become a better person, just as Michael knocks on the door to inform them of an emergency meeting. And as the episode ends, we wonder if Chidi will rat her out or not. So I was trying to think about what to call this, this next section, which I would call like fan Jewing or fan roving.
Okay.
The episode. Do you have like a favorite part of this episode?
My favorite part was when Michael is telling her how she died. Because it's very clear that something is off from the very beginning of the episode. And he just goes on and on and on. So that was my and also as someone who likes froyo, I was imagining myself walking through the streets of paradise with 16 handles on every corner. That sounded like really appetizing to me.
See, I totally didn't get that something was off at the beginning, but I will say that I did love the way in which Eleanor describes herself and like all the evil things that she has done, and this the way that she has this flashback to her experience selling what's it called, Nasopro and Nasopro Senior to this worthless dietary supplement, and how she's like, I get it, I get to cheat people and defraud them. I mean, she just sells it as so
she owns it.
She owns it. And that we somehow like her, we seem to like want to root for her and to in some way, or maybe that's just the rabbi.
But it's an incredible balance, like, I mean, I think about all the times where I see things where it's like, that's a really good actor because they made me not like them, right? Like how many things like, wow, you like just really you like went for that super unlikable character. And Eleanor has all of the qualities and the whole story of someone who like I would find usually pretty loathsome, right? And yet at the same time, you adore her and you root for her. Exactly like you said, you want her to succeed, which I find to be both, a testament to her acting, and to her the writing, obviously, and the composition of the character.
There is at the party late in the episode, Michael is giving a speech, and he looks right at Eleanor as he says, "Every single one of you is a good person." And she kind of looks back at him for a second, and then she gives this little like cross-eyed thing and takes another drink, like her 10th drink out of her wine or whatever it is that she's drinking. It's just such a great acting moment. So let's talk about a couple of Jewish texts that relate to this pilot, and this will be really the challenging part, where we're going to find out where something which we've been talking about, which is funny, maybe turns into something that we hope we can figure out how to talk about in a funny way. So this idea of the value of every action in terms of destiny relates to one of really my very favorite teachings about the season of the new year from Rabbi Moses Maimonides. It's from his Laws of Tshuva, of personal change, chapter 3, number 4, for those of you wanting to look this up. It says, every person should see oneself the entire year as though perfectly balanced between merit and guilt, and also the entire world as thoroughly balanced between merit and guilt. If a person does one more wrong, that person tilts the balance personally and tilts the balance for the whole world to the side of guilt. If a person does one mitzvah, one good act, that person tilts the balance personally and tilts the balance for the whole world, all of it, to the side of merit, and saves and rescues both oneself and the whole world. So I love this idea that there's something like consequential about a particular act, and it really reminded me of this.
It's lifting the cosmic significance of all of our, everyday interactions. And I also love that it is inherently picking up and noting this tension between your own merit, and you are contextually within the context of the broader merit of the entire world, right? Like that you as an individual cannot divorce yourself from the stakes of existence, right, as a whole, which is it's an idea that we really shouldn't take lightly at all.
Usually I think about this in connection with how your action affects the world, but the good place setup is that your action kind of affects your destiny. So in that way, it's a bit of a different idea. Yeah.
I think that the image of the scale is a telling one, and it's common in judgment. But I think that the other thing to sort of think about here is that is not necessarily obvious, but sort of an underlying in the Maimonidean view here is like, you can understand your actions as having cosmic stakes because they influence other people's actions, which I think is also something that's significant within the good place, is this idea that in order to, really achieve and arrive at our best selves and to redeem ourselves, we have to do it together. We can't do it alone. We need a team, right? Like, it's not just about you. You are part of a whole. You're a part of a whole world, and everything that you do affects the whole world, and everything that you do affects the team. And so I think that that's also just a really important idea to lift up from both Maimonides and from the sacred literature of the good place.
I think in Maimonides, there's this as-if quality, which is that you don't actually know the score. So you should treat yourself at any moment as though your next act will tilt the score for you and for the world in this direction.
And you don't know the score in the good place, but like the difference here, and I think you hinted at this, John, that is not in the case of the good place, is that Michael doesn't tell like the collective score of everybody who's in the good. Although, spoiler alert, collective scores do end up mattering in the future of the show. But what is that, season 3 probably? But the good, that you aren't aware of your, every merit badge, mitzvah point that you acquire over the course of time.
So there's this other teaching which is very uncannily connected, and it comes from, and I want to share it and then also point to some funny things from the episode. It comes from Pirkei Avot, which is a book of sayings from around the year 200 probably-ish, collected of the early Talmudic rabbis, if we can call them that. And this is the first from the first statements in chapter 2 there. It says that Rabbi, refers to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, said, "Be careful with a light commandment as with a weighty one, for you do not know the reward for the fulfillment of the commandments. Also, think about the loss of a commandment, of doing a commandment, against its reward, and the gain of a wrong against its loss. And look at 3 things, and you will not come into the hands of doing wrong. Know what there is above you, an eye that sees and an ear that hears, and that all your deeds are written in a book." And so here we have this idea that there are things that there are different mitzvot, there are different acts and commanded acts and prohibitions that actually do have different weights, but you might or might not know what they are. And so just I have to say that one of the things that I learned actually listening to the official Good Place podcast is that you really should pause it, and when you're watching on Netflix, to see the little things that are written on the screen. So did you happen to notice any of the
I didn't,
scores,
not all of them. I remember that there was one in a later episode where somebody had a vanity license plate, and that was substantial demerits, and I was like, yes. And I think every single time that I see somebody with a vanity license plate, I'm like, how many points did you lose for that one?
So if you go back and watch, they kind of start with stuff that's small points, plus and minus, and then get to bigger things. So one thing that is a negative is overstate personal connection to tragedy that has nothing to do with you.
Oof.
That's a negative. A positive was went to cousin's child's jazz dance recital.
Wow.
Here's one that I think you'll love as a negative, root for Yankees.
Oh, that's definitely a negative to me.
That's a negative to you.
Yeah. Well, you remind me, Red Sox or Yankees? You're a Sox fan.
Sox over
yeah,
here.
That's right. You're from it. I find the Yankees utterly loathsome. I'm sorry to all of you who are listening to this podcast who are Yankees fans. I hate the team, not you.
So, the idea that there are lighter and heavier mitzvot, things that weigh more in consequence, what do you think about that?
Well, I think about it, sort of in relation to the text from Maimonides that we read above, that we should take seriously every single action. I think that sort of lifted up in this text as well, is that you never know what's going to tip the balance. It's a butterfly right? It's the chaos theory. A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, and that leads to a hurricane in the Atlantic. It's just a clarion call to be careful with everything that you do, and to take the consequences of your actions seriously. What about you, John?
Well, I have a lot of trouble with this idea, and anybody who's listened to me in my own congregation, where I talk a lot, kind of listens to me struggle with this, because it seems to me that the Torah is built on the idea that things happen in the world, and so it's not just that the mitzvot are a list of things, all of which are good, and any of them is equally good. I mean, the whole story of the Torah has to do with this. Is rooted in this oppression in Egypt and liberation. Things that are connected to that are clearly very consequential, and some other things that might be Jewish laws, about not mixing 2 kinds of fabrics together in the clothes you wear. It just doesn't seem to me like it can be that weighty. So I think the idea of, actually there's almost a paradox. He says, be careful with a light commandment as with a weighty one. Almost Rabbi Yehuda here seems to be recognizing that there are such things, and but that somehow you should think about. You shouldn't disregard the ones maybe that have less importance and say that they have no importance.
No, I think what you're saying sort of makes me think about the now appropriately disregard. Whatever the word is. Ashamed idea of broken windows theory of policing, right? Is that you sweat the small stuff so that the big stuff, that the big stuff. And I think that there definitely is appropriately understood to be distinctions in the weighty moral classification of our work and the things that we do in the world. I think one of the things that sort of emerges for me and I guess is kind of a question that The Good Place asks inherently, and then deals with over the course of the entire season, series from the pilot, is like, okay, this is all well and good. We have this great book of our deeds, but where is there space to grow? Where is there space to get better? Where is the, sort of self-compassion, as it were? Like, is there room for self-love here? So that you can forgive yourself, right? Like, if you take this seriously, you become cheaty, right? Like, this is the cheaty fallacy. I can't do anything because everything that I do has cosmic significance, not just for myself, but for the entire world. Like, how could you not live paralyzed by those kinds of stakes? How could you not? Yeah, that's what I'm wrestling with as I read this, and nonetheless, I think it's a powerful idea to take seriously the impact of your actions. Of course, like, we should do that, but then, okay, how do we take care of ourselves too?
Yeah, I was looking at some commentary from this Maimonides again, who I think will be a recurring character in this podcast.
Nah, you think?
Yeah. And who really was kind of laying out that there are different kinds of things here. There are like punishments, and some of those punishments are the kinds of things we would think of as punishable in human society, and some are like religious punishments, and some are punishments we expect. I don't expect them in the afterlife. It's not how I think about Judaism, but maybe some traditional Judaism did. And then there's kind of a sort of inner rewards, and then there's kind of how God looks at our souls in the big picture, and that all those things are real, but we're not really aware of all of them. So at the end it says all your deeds are written in a book, but we have some partial perspective on what matters how much, but not the whole perspective. So we have to think about it some. But I guess what you're saying is that the small stuff, we don't know exactly how the small stuff adds up, so therefore we should sweat it. But I guess the question is, like, when there are small stuff that doesn't seem to connect to some big stuff, should we sweat that too? Because it's in and of itself a little self-contained thing. Should we focus on that?
I think that, does it matter if every single, picture on your wall is hung perfectly? What is that? What benefit? And by the way, I don't mean to dismiss that. I mean that very seriously, that for that kind of aesthetic concern makes a difference in your well-being. I think that the other thing that I'm sort of like kind of stuck with as I look at this is also just, and you sort of mentioned this, John, is that how consequentialist it is, right? Like, the end is what matters, right? It's not the journey. It's not, the process that you go through of accumulating each of these different points. I don't know if you read that into the text or not. But it's like, you do things because because of what's going to happen as a consequence of doing them, instead of, and I don't mean to be hedonistic here. I don't mean to say that, like, you should, do whatever you want and see and be a pleasure seeker. I mean, actually, that's another, thing that the Good Place will deal with in later episodes. But rather that, we should take seriously the experience of the moment in a way that I don't think that there's, not to read against these texts, which I think are incredibly valuable, but I think that if I were to pick up on something that I think that the Good Place sort of takes a contrast in its, inherent positioning, it's that there's more to it than just the book, right? And the point system.
Right. And I think I actually think that the Good Place as a show is not really about the Good Place as like a final right. place. Like, maybe that's part of what you're saying. It's not about the final score. Although I have to say, like, these are the kinds of things that get me. So one of the things that takes place at the party, at Tahani's party, is Eleanor, who says, are these people really that much better than me? And they cut to these various conversations of other people who aren't.
Oh my God, that was so funny.
One says to them, one was talking about donating donating both their kidneys, to someone that they met on a bus 10 minutes ago, and that, of course, they said, but you'll die. I said, yes, but that person will live. And, they're like, how is it possible not to regard that as, supremely good, and to say, okay, no, wait a minute, is there a perspective in which that would be like not
the right thing to do?
Yeah, or not the admirable thing to do.
Well, but our tradition doesn't allow for you to, utterly impoverish yourself to feed the hungry. You're not allowed to do that. You have to take care of yourself, right? So it's not necessarily a matter of, but yes, it's hard to pick a bones with like that seems like a pretty beyond decent thing to do.
So the cliffhanger, which to me, sells the show to me, is at the end where she says, you're a professor of moral philosophy. Wouldn't your job be to like teach me in a way that would make me better? And the idea that actually studying these things would make a person better by studying the philosophy is cool. And of course, the idea that she could become better, that's even a possibility that Chidi has to figure out. That seems to be, obviously a theme that recurs. And this particular episode doesn't go into this question of tshuva and the means by which that happens, how we become better. But I think that's where we're heading, and I'm looking forward to talking about.
Yeah.
So one of the things that happens at the end of the official Good Place podcast that I thought would be fun to adapt is just to bring it to something real with about something good in the world. And I thought it'd be made nice to hear if you have maybe a teacher or someone who kind of taught you something important about ethics that you want to honor by mentioning them here.
About ethics specifically,
or ethical behavior.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think. I mean, I've been blessed by so many extraordinary teachers in my life. I don't know, John, did you have somebody in mind? Maybe yours.
Sure. I mean, I'm gonna call out a teacher I had, a Hebrew school teacher for many years at the Talmud Torah of St. Paul, where I grew up. His name is Earl Schwartz, and he was the first person who really brought ethical philosophy into our classrooms to teach us about it and thinking about how we, even the psychology of growing as ethical people and some of the moral dilemmas that are in the Bible. I'm still in touch with him, and he continues to be a really important teacher that set me off on this exploration of moral philosophy and ethics.
I had this wonderful teacher in college, Reverend Dr. Chas Howard, who was the university chaplain at Penn. And I remember I took this class from him, and when we were setting the norms, he shared a norm of turn judgment into curiosity. And that was just something that, really a line that really resonated with me, and has, been echoing in my head ever since, in terms of how I treat people and try and figure out their stories and how they got to where they are, knowing that, everybody's fighting their own battle, and what can I learn from people, and also, how can I help? How can I help is another question that I like to ask a lot.
And that's the first episode of Tov. Thank you so much for joining us and helping us get started. Our website is tovgoodplace.com. That's T-O-V, Good Place, where you can see the texts we discussed and the Hebrew terms we used, as well as links for deeper dives. Subscribe to Tov wherever you get podcasts, and give us a good rating. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Tov Good Place. Again, I'm John Spira-Savett, and if you have ideas for how the podcast can be more interesting or more fun, email me at tov@tovgoodplace.com, T-O-V. You can follow me at RabbiJS3 or on my blog, rabbijohn.net. That's Jon. Thank you, Rabbi Dan Ross, for joining me. You can follow Dan at RAV_WOD and check out centralsynagogue.org. Thank you to my home base, Temple Beth Abraham in Nashua, New Hampshire, tbanashua.org. Come by if you're in the area, or join us on Zoom for learning or services from anywhere, anytime. Thanks again for joining us on Tov. And to paraphrase Mark Evan Jackson's sign-off on the official Good Place podcast, go learn more about something good.
Bum, 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 bum.